folks, welcome back. Dennis Victoza, also known as Jeff Noodles, and today we're going to be talking about the Odyssey. Yay, the greatest, worst movie in the world. Here we go. I'm very excited about not being excited about this movie. Anyway, folks, the Odyssey has now been out for a few days, and there are a lot of allegations circulating about what's actually going on surrounding this film. But before we get into those, let's backtrack a little bit and talk about how we got here. There's been a tremendous amount of controversy surrounding the Odyssey, from the casting decisions to the modernization of the dialogue and a whole host of other creative choices. And all of that has led to considerable online backlash. Now, one of the first responses from supporters of the Odyssey and Christopher Nolan was to point to the Rotten Tomatoes critic score. They kept posting it everywhere as proof that the backlash wasn't representative of reality, but we all know critics aren't exactly the most trustworthy metric anymore. They're often completely disconnected from general audiences, and a lot of people believe they're bought into the system. Now, what really shifted the conversation was when audience scores started coming in, because those were overwhelmingly positive as well. So much so that as of the recording of this video, the Odyssey currently sits at a 94% critic score and a 97 audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. Now, what does that actually mean? We covered this in the last video we made about the Odyssey, but it's worth repeating because a lot of people still misunderstand how Rotten Tomatoes works. A 94% critic score does not mean the movie averaged a 94 out of 100. That's not how the system works. It simply means that 94% of critics rated the movie above the threshold for a positive review, which is typically around a 6 out of 10. In other words, the movie received 94% positive reviews. It doesn't mean everybody gave it an A+ or thought it was a masterpiece. That's one of the most misleading aspects of Rotten Tomatoes. A movie can receive a whole bunch of mediocre reviews, like 6 out of 10s, D+ essentially, or just barely positive reviews, and still end up looking like an absolute banger because it has a glowing critic percentage. That's the fundamental criticism people have always had with Rotten Tomatoes. It tells you how many people liked something, not how much they liked it. That brings us to the popcorn meter, which is the audience score, and that's currently sitting at 97%. This is where people have become increasingly skeptical over the last few days. Many users have claimed it's been surprisingly difficult to post negative reviews for the Odyssey on Rotten Tomatoes. The first indication came when people began comparing Rotten Tomatoes with other review platforms and noticed that the numbers didn't really add up. Now, all that being said, the last time we covered this movie on the channel, Metacritic was sitting at a 5.0 user score. It's now climbed up to a 5.2. That's a slight increase, but that's still firmly in the mixed territory. Roughly 46% of user reviews are positive, while around 45% are negative. In other words, it's almost evenly split. As I mentioned, that's where the speculation and skepticism around Rotten Tomatoes really began. People started asking why there was such a dramatic difference between the audience reception on one platform versus another. The primary allegation is that Rotten Tomatoes isn't being fully transparent about negative reviews, and this all started with users sharing their own experiences of having difficulty posting negative reviews for the movie on Rotten Tomatoes. From there, people began speculating that positive reviews were being artificially boosted or botted on Rotten Tomatoes. Whether that's true or not is what people have been debating primarily on X. For example, here's a thread from Mr. Obvious covering this entire situation. He writes, "It looks like the vast majority of the reviews for the Odyssey aren't the incredible higher than Lord of the Rings 95 to 97% critic and user scores Rotten Tomatoes is claiming. It looks like most ratings are actually between 2 and 6. The average rating is 5.1 out of 10 on Metacritic. If you look through the comments, you'll also notice 5-star reviews that pretty much read like they were written by bots or corporate shills. Critic review scores are overwhelmingly positive, shocking, and there appears to be a massive marketing psyop narrative pushing the idea that this film is some sort of masterpiece, totally worth going to the movie theater to buy a ticket for in full IMAX. And if you're poor, you only get to see half the movie because the rest is cut off on a regular theater." Now, Mr. Obvious goes on to claim that the movie is being astroturfed because it allegedly needs to make close to $1 billion in order to break even. Obviously, those are claims that he's making. Those are allegations. We're simply reviewing the discourse surrounding this movie and the arguments people are making online. The reason these claims have gained traction is because, at least from the conversations I've had with people in real life who've actually watched this movie, the reception doesn't seem to match the overwhelming praise reflected on Rotten Tomatoes. Most people I've spoken to describe the movie as just fine. It's an interesting ride. It has some strong moments, but it also has a lot of issues. Now, I'm saying that neutrally as someone who isn't planning to watch the movie. I've simply spoken to a number of people who have. Most of them don't describe it as some kind of cinematic masterpiece, as you would believe so from reading these online reviews. They describe it as a fairly typical Christopher Nolan movie, visually impressive, action-heavy from beginning to end, entertaining enough, but not necessarily flawless. That's why people have become increasingly interested in these review discrepancies from website to website. Here's another example. Aesthetica posted on X saying there's just no way the actual audience rating is 97% on Rotten Tomatoes. Metacritic has the movie at a 5.3 user score. Letterboxd has it at 4.3, and IMDb has it at 8.3 out of 10. Notably, according to Mr. Obvious, as we saw earlier, IMDb was also allegedly removing reviews. Aesthetica goes a step further, claiming that Rotten Tomatoes is removing negative reviews at the behest of the studio, and to support that allegation, they later shared a Reddit thread that we're about to look at in a moment. The headline from the thread reads, Rotten Tomatoes says the Odyssey has a 97% audience rating. The raw JSON data proves it's actually 56%. And that's where the story really starts getting interesting. The post was made on the Kotaku and Action subreddit, and as I mentioned earlier, the title reads, Rotten Tomatoes says the Odyssey has a 97% audience score. The raw JSON data proves it's actually 56%. The post begins by arguing that Rotten Tomatoes made a major change to how audiences' scores were calculated back in 2019, and that most people don't realize what changed. According to the author, that single change is why the Odyssey currently displays a glowing 97% audience score. However, they argued that if you standardize the data differently, the actual audience approval is much closer to 56%. Again, these are the claims being made in this Reddit post. We're simply reviewing the evidence they're presenting and the conclusions they've drawn from it. Now, this Redditor argues that the discrepancy comes down to the difference between Rotten Tomatoes' verified audience score and its all audience score. According to this post, before 2019, Rotten Tomatoes primarily relied on a traditional review system. If someone wanted to leave a review, they had to actively navigate to Rotten Tomatoes, create or log in to an account, find the movie page, and voluntarily submit a rating. In other words, there was a certain amount of effort required to leave a review. After 2019, however, Rotten Tomatoes shifted its emphasis toward the verified audience score, which is tied to ticket purchases through companies like Fandango. According to this Reddit post, after someone buys a ticket and leaves the theater, they're sent a push notification asking something along the lines of, did you like the movie? They simply tap a star rating, submit it, and they're done. The Reddit author argues that reducing user friction isn't inherently a bad thing. On paper, it's actually a pretty reasonable idea, but making those verified ticket buyer responses the default score under the popcorn meter branding fundamentally changed how the audience reception is presented. The post goes even further, arguing that the resulting score inflation was entirely predictable and suggesting that Rotten Tomatoes likely understood exactly what effect this new system would have. Again, that's speculation on the author's part, but it's part of the argument that a lot of people are making online. Now, this Redditor also claims that the old polling data is still hidden inside the Rotten Tomatoes page source if you know where to look for it. According to the post, you can open the Odyssey page on Rotten Tomatoes, right-click anywhere on the page, select View Page Source, press Ctrl-F, search for Media Score JSON, and eventually you'll find a block of raw JSON data. Buried inside the data are two figures labeled liked count and not liked count, which the author claims reveal how the different audience scores are being calculated. Now, this Reddit post then walks through its own calculations. According to the Redditor, the verified audience score consists of approximately 7,360 positive reviews, resulting in the 96 to 97% popcorn meter score that's prominently displayed on Rotten Tomatoes. They then attempt to isolate what they describe as the independent, unverified poll results by subtracting the verified responses from the overall totals. Based on those calculations, they arrive at a roughly 498 positive reviews and 388 negative reviews from users who voluntarily navigated to Rotten Tomatoes to leave a review. Now, from there, the Redditor calculates what they argue is the true audience approval rating. Using only those unverified reviews, they conclude that approximately 56.2% of users rated the movie positively. So according to this Reddit analysis among the people who intentionally went to Rotten Tomatoes to review the Odyssey, only about 56% gave it a positive rating. The author argues that the 97% score displayed on the website is largely the product of verified ticket buyers responding to push notifications rather than users independently choosing to review the film. Now, obviously, there was a lot of HTML, JSON coding, and math in that explanation, so I wanted to simplify this for you as much as possible in case you didn't follow everything we were just saying. The point is that this Reddit thread argues there are effectively two different audience pools being combined, and that the score most prominently displayed on Rotten Tomatoes doesn't necessarily reflect what they consider to be more organic audience response. But the allegations don't stop there either, because over on the Critical Drinker subreddit, another post claims that the Odyssey is being review bombed. But in reverse, instead of people flooding the site with negative reviews, the allegation is that it's being flooded with overwhelmingly positive ones. The post includes screenshots showing a number of glowing 5-star reviews left by brand new accounts with no previous review history whatsoever. And the caption reads, "There are tens of reviews like these coming from brand new profiles. This is their only review." They also point to examples of extremely generic reviews, things like a lot of fight and action, before sarcastically adding, "definitely not suspicious." Now, all that being said, does that automatically prove anything? No, it doesn't. Brand new users leave reviews all the time, especially from major blockbuster releases, but critics of the film argue that the sheer number of newly created accounts, combined with the overwhelming positive tone and repetitive nature of many of the reviews, raises questions about whether everything is entirely organic and kosher. Again, those are the allegations being made online, and they're part of the broader conversation surrounding this movie on X. Adding to the speculation, Mr. Obvious also makes another major allegation. He claims that the Odyssey is artificially inflating ticket sales by studios or affiliated parties buying up theater seats to make the movie appear more successful than it actually is. He even goes so far as to describe it as fraud. Now, that's obviously a very serious accusation. It's worth pointing out that the movie has only just opened and reportedly earned roughly $250 million globally during its opening weekend. So we're not disputing those box office numbers here. We're simply reviewing the allegations and the broader conversation that's been circulating online. I feel like I have to keep repeating this because a lot of this stuff, it's evidence, but at the same time, it's largely unverified and it's speculative. And also, it supports a specific narrative that, while I do agree that some of this may be playing out, at the same time, we have to exist in the real world and take real evidence for what it is. Now, that being said, to support his claim, Mr. Obvious shares screenshots from people who say they purchased tickets and were forced to choose terrible seats because the online seating charts showed the theater was nearly full. However, according to these individuals, when they actually arrived at the theater, they found that many of those supposedly occupied seats were actually empty. Again, these are anecdotal reports posted online. They're not conclusive proof of anything, but they are part of the larger discussion surrounding this movie and why some people believe there may be an effort to shape public perception of its success. So where does the truth actually lie? Honestly, I don't know. I can't tell you. We're simply reviewing the allegations, looking at the evidence people are pointing to, and discussing the broader discourse surrounding the Odyssey. Would any of this surprise me if it turned out to be true? Not really. We've seen manipulation in all sorts of industries before. In fact, just a little later, I'm going to be discussing election interference and election manipulation today in a debate. So if people believe elections can be manipulated by foreign governments or even domestic interests, then it shouldn't be surprising that entertainment companies might also try to influence public perception of their products. These studios invest hundreds of millions of dollars into these projects. Naturally, they want to maximize the chances of getting a return on that investment. There have been already two massive disappointments just this year with Supergirl and Moana. I'm sure NBC Universal looked at what Warner Brothers and Disney went through and thought, hey, let's throw everything we've got behind this movie. They need to make their money back. The film reportedly needs to earn somewhere close to $1 billion just to break even. They didn't assemble one of the most star-studded casts imaginable just to make the movie fail, right? From a business perspective, that logic is completely understandable. That being said, these remain allegations and rumors circulating on the internet. The HTML and JSON data are certainly interesting if they actually mean what people claim they mean, but we also have to recognize that we're dealing with technical interpretations of website coding. It's important to take everything with a healthy dose of skepticism. This isn't necessarily a criminal matter. At the very least, the discussion is really about transparency, honesty, and whether consumers are being presented with an accurate picture of audience sentiment. Whether any of this would rise to the level of fraud or some other legal issue is an entirely separate question that I don't believe anybody's actually currently qualified to answer. And again, most of the people I've spoken to who've actually seen the movie describe it as entertaining enough, but nowhere near the greatest film they've ever watched. They enjoyed parts of it, but they also had plenty of criticisms. Whether it ultimately ends up being Nolan's best film ever, his worst film, or something somewhere in the middle, I guess we'll have to find out over time. Now, should you go watch that movie? I'll just tell you this, folks. Do whatever the hell you want. I'm personally not planning on watching it in theaters. Maybe when it eventually comes out to streaming, I'll check it out, but I'm certainly not losing any sleep over missing this movie, primarily because I've already read the Odyssey, I've read the Iliad, I've read the Greek classics. I'm already familiar with these stories, and as I mentioned in my last video, I do find it interesting that Hollywood chose this particular moment when Christianity appears to be experiencing a cultural resurgence to release a massive star-studded adaptation centered entirely around pagan mythology and pagan gods. Maybe that's meaningful, maybe it isn't. I'm just pointing out the timing is very interesting. Now, outside of my speculation, my advice is simple. Think for yourself. Maintain a healthy level of skepticism, look at the evidence, consider the arguments being made, and come to your own conclusions. Don't let me tell you what to think. Don't let the internet tell you what to think. Evaluate information for yourself and decide what you want to believe. Anyway, folks, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Do you think there's any truth to these allegations? Have you seen the Odyssey for yourself? If you have, what do you think? Was it good? I'd love to hear your perspective. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like and subscribe, share it with a friend if you think they'd enjoy it as well, and I will see you in the next one. Take care. Peace.